In this first video for Chapter 2, we're going to begin to look at some ways to display the data that we learned how to collect from Chapter 1. The first thing to recall is that there is going to be variation from sample to sample that we're using to make assertions about the population. And it's useful to display this data in a manner that's easy to interpret. The patterns that we see in our display will help us decide how to analyze this statistically. We need a large number of events to see what's going on. Just one person in a sample is not going to be enough. We need to sample 50 or 100 people so we can begin to hopefully see a pattern. And a lot of times we can represent this data in some graphical form. And we're going to do this with the distribution of a sample. The distribution of a sample is a way of organizing data more easily so we can observe the frequency of values. Instead of trying to look at just a list of numbers and see what's going on, we're going to use a graph. And we're going to look at several different types of graphs in Chapter 2. The first one that we're going to see is a dot plot. So a dot plot is a type of graphical summary for numeric data. And that's important to note. Dot plot is only going to be used with numeric data. Each observation is represented by a dot on a number line, and again it helps us visualize patterns. So for example, here we have a sample of book costs. The cheapest book we see was $8 at the bookstore, then $9, $10, $10, $14, all the way up to the more expensive books, getting up to $150, $153, $161, and $292. Now, as this stands, we could analyze this and see, what's a reasonable price for a book. But staring at a list of numbers, especially a longer list of numbers, it's more difficult to do. It's a little bit easier to do here because the data happens to be in order from smallest to largest, but had it just been completely randomized, it might be difficult to see the smallest and largest prices. So we could use a dot plot to do this. So across the bottom, we have essentially a number line, and this number line goes from 0 all the way to 300 because the cheapest book was $8, the most expensive was $292. There's no need to go all the way to 500. And in a dot plot, each numeric value is represented by a dot. So this first dot here, this is that $8 book. Then we've got the $9 book right here. And note, we've got this stack of dots here and here. These would be my $10 books because $10 showed up twice in the data set. I would have two 10s right on top of one another. Same thing here. Notice this stack of 3 dots. Well, that has to be the $83 books here. All the way up until this must be the $292 book. So we can see, well, most of these books at this bookstore, just to sort of estimate, they're between about $10 and maybe $160 or so. But they can get all the way up to close to $300. So just a quick judgment about these books. Benefits to dot plots are that you can see individual data values. You can spot outliers pretty easily. They're way off by themselves. We could classify this as an outlier, and we'll look at more outlier information in Chapter 3. And it describes the distribution visually, so we can make a quick judgment about what's happening with our data. Some drawbacks, it's not as common. We typically see a histogram, and it's not great for data with a lot of individual values, it becomes a little bit too cluttered to see what's going on in the dot plot. So that wraps up this video on dot plots. Key things to know: dot plots are a way to display numeric data, not categorical data, and each individual data point is a dot.